In a world of luxury suits, million-dollar watches, and billion-dollar negotiations, the name Alexander Vance was synonymous with absolute coldness. He never smiled, not because he didn't know how, but because he saw no reason to. As a founding partner of the law firm Vance & Cross, Alexander wasn't just one of the most successful attorneys in America, he was also one of the youngest billionaires on Wall Street. He didn't win by luck, but by a mind sharp as a razor, analytical skills like a machine, and a heart as frozen as a block of Arctic ice. People called him many names: the steel lawyer, the bloodless shark, the emotionless machine, but he didn't care. To Alexander, those were just the useless whispers of people on the outside. Friday night, the VIP lounge on the 58th floor of the Langford Private Club was bathed in soft golden light and the rich scent of fine cognac. Alexander sat with his legs crossed, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the city through bulletproof glass. He wasn't part of the conversation, just listening. That habit alone had won him countless lawsuits. Speak less, observe more. Still alone, Alex? Laughter rang out from the billiard table, where three men in black suits were mid-aim. He probably doesn't even know what romance means. Another chuckled, sending the cue ball into the corner pocket. Alexander turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. Define love, he said coolly. A delusion that causes people to behave irrationally. I don't need that to live. Say that in front of a woman and you're getting a shoe thrown at you. Marcus, a well-known real estate mogul, roared with laughter. Tell you what, I bet you couldn't survive 1 week living with an ordinary woman. I mean, not a model, not a lawyer, not some high society princess, a real everyday woman like an office worker, a florist, or a cafe waitress. Alexander rested his chin on his hand, his cold gaze sharp like he was cross-examining a witness. And the objective, entertainment. My friend. Marcus raised his glass. If you last 1 week without kicking her out, without looking down on her, and without her running away from you, I'll transfer to you my entire stake in the Manhattan West Tower. A sudden silence fell over the room. Manhattan West wasn't just any project. It was a gem in the heart of New York, worth over $80 million. Alexander took a sip of whiskey, his lips curled, not a smile, but the signal of a predator closing in. Interesting, he said, setting down the glass. But what if I win? Marcus arched a brow. What do you want? I want you to sign an agreement dissolving your entire outsourced security system and let me rebuild it my way. Marcus hesitated. That was something he'd always refused in the past, but this time he was convinced he'd win. Deal. 7 days. She has to live in your house under your roof, and I get to pick her. No interference. Alexander nodded calm, as if he had just agreed to a casual chess match with the schoolchild. Then let's begin, he said, voice cold as steel sliding across glass. I'll treat her like a contract, and I always win when I play by the rules. That night, when he returned to his nearly 6,500 feet penthouse, Alexander sat at his Italian walnut desk. On the screen were dozens of unread emails from partners, lawyers, clients, and shareholders. He didn't open a single one. Instead, he created a new file entitled, It's Social Experiment, 7 Days. Below, he typed the first line objective: maintain the presence of an ordinary woman in my personal space for 10068 consecutive hours. Evaluation criteria: no emotional response, no distraction, no behavioral loss of control. Reward: Manhattan West, plus full control over tower security. Alexander leaned back, eyes cold as they stared out into the night sky. To him, emotions were variables, and he was the man who controlled all variables. He thought, what could a normal girl possibly do to someone like me? At most, she'd cry, complain, or run away. He didn't expect that there would be one who did none of those things. A girl who would look him straight in the eye and say, you don't have to smile, but if you keep freezing like this, you'll forget how to live. But that's a story for later. For now, Alexander saw this as nothing more than a stupid bet. He was sure to win. A little distraction in a world where emotions were a luxury, because he was Alexander Vance, the man who didn't know how to smile. The little bookstore sat tucked beneath the shade of an old maple tree on a quiet street in historic Brooklyn. Its name was written in white chalk on a hanging blackboard. Liberto, old books, new stories. Inside it was a silent world filled with yellowed pages, the scent of aged wood, and the soft aroma of coffee. Eleanor Hart, 26, had her hair loosely tied at the nape of her neck. She wore a sweater worn thin at the shoulders and faded jeans. She sat behind the counter, flipping through an Austen novel while glancing at her beat-up phone every 2 minutes just to make sure her father hadn't called with an emergency. Eleanor's father had just been discharged after a minor stroke. He needed care, but Eleanor couldn't afford a nurse. She worked 2 jobs, mornings at the bookstore, evenings at a small cafe. Life was far from easy, yet she held on to one thing, the belief that beauty still existed, like in the pages of the book she loved. The door swung open, a soft jingle of wind chimes. Eleanor looked up. At first glance, she saw a tall man wearing dark sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His grey coat nearly reached his knees, and his steps were fast, urgent, like he was running from something. She squinted. "Another book thief junkie," she muttered, placing her Austen novel down. The man walked deeper into the shop, eyes scanning the shelves, then stopped at a display of classic literature. He pulled out a Dostoevsky, flipped through a few pages, and put it back on the wrong shelf. Eleanor frowned. A few minutes later, he grabbed another book, The Trial by Kafka, then tossed it onto the children's shelf. That was it. "Hey." Eleanor sprang from her seat and marched over. "Do you think this is a public library or a playground?" Alexander paused. For the first time in years, he was at a loss. "You're talking to me?" he asked, his deep voice tinged with surprise. "Am I yelling at the bookshelf?" Eleanor said, "Hands on hips. You're messing up the entire classification system. Misplacing books is a crime in a store like this." Alexander looked up, lowering his sunglasses just enough to reveal a pair of cold, ash-grey eyes. "Do you have any idea who I am?" He asked a question he often used to silence people. "Oh," Eleanor squinted, pretending to think. A mysterious man fleeing reality, or just a customer who doesn't know how to read shelf signs. Alexander tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing a stubborn witness. This girl didn't know who he was. No fluster, no fear, no sucking up. Interesting. "Sorry," he said flatly. "I'm just looking for a book." "Then you should look for a category map." Eleanor pointed to a laminated diagram on the wall. "Otherwise, I'll add a system disruption fee to your receipt." Alexander's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but clearly he was amused. Just then, a group of men in suits and dark glasses hurried past the shop's glass windows. One of them turned and glanced inside, eyes scanning the store. Eleanor noticed too. "Fans?" she asked, tilting her head at him. "Paparazzi," he muttered. "Oh." Eleanor nodded. "Actor, singer, politician?" "No, then billionaire." She laughed, then shrugged. "Doesn't matter. If you need to hide, we've got a basement full of old books, but you have to promise not to mess up the order." Alexander hesitated. A strange feeling rose inside him, being invited into a space where no one cared about who he was. He nodded. Eleanor led him downstairs and flipped on a warm yellow light. Thousands of books were arranged like a miniature maze. A worn armchair sat in the corner next to an oil heater and a small tea table. "Take a seat. I'll make some ginger tea," she said gently, like he was just another friend passing through. 20 minutes later, Alexander was sunk into the old armchair, hot tea in hand, gazing around the small room filled with the scent of old paper. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. No ringing phones, no urgent emails, no contracts, no courtrooms. Just a girl in a worn-out sweater quietly reading a battered book and occasionally smiling at lines she knew by heart. She didn't ask for his name, didn't care why he needed to hide, didn't seek anything from him, and that more than anything was why he couldn't take his eyes off her. He didn't know that in just a few days this girl with her bright eyes and sarcastic mouth would melt the ice that had sat in his heart for over 30 years. But for now she simply turned to him and asked, "You read Dostoevsky without getting a headache?" Alexander replied, "Better than Kafka." Eleanor giggled. She didn't know that her smile, simple and unintentional, had just marked the first tiny crack in the heart of a billionaire lawyer. That morning, Libretto Bookstore was as quiet as ever. Eleanor was dusting the shelves with a damp cloth, wearing fabric gloves, humming an old tune. Outside, snow fell gently onto the awning, making the whole scene feel like something out of an old film. She had just placed Wuthering Heights back on the shelf when the wind chime jingled again. Elena looked up and froze slightly. It was him. Same silver-grey coat, same ice-cold eyes, and a walk so confident it bordered on invasive. Alexander Vance entered the store as if he owned the entire building. But this time, he didn't rifle through books or mess up the shelves. He walked straight to the counter where Elena stood and placed a thick envelope in front of her. "We need to talk," he said, voice low and firm. Elena glanced at the envelope, then back up. "Paying your fine for messing up our shelf system the other day. I don't charge much, maybe $5 per misplaced book." "No," he replied. "I want to hire you." Elena frowned. "I'm not a tutor, and if you're looking for someone to read books for you, I'm not a reviewer either. Number, I want you to live with me for 1 week. I'll pay you $1,000 per day." A heavy silence filled the small room. Eleanor blinked. "Sorry, what did you just say?" 7 days. You'll live in my home as a companion. We'll eat together, share living space, and you'll be present when I need you. I assure you there will be no inappropriate requests. This is a paid arrangement." Eleanor let out a dry laugh. "So, what is this? A social experiment or some rich guy game for when you're bored?" Alexander still didn't smile. "You just need to be yourself. I don't need you to pretend to be friendly or act like someone in a movie. I need someone genuinely ordinary, and I believe you're a good fit. You don't think asking a stranger to live with you is completely bizarre?" Eleanor crossed her arms. "I shelf books. I'm not some pretend girlfriend for hire. I'm not asking for a fake girlfriend," Alexander replied. "Just your presence for a week, and I promise I won't touch you, won't cross any boundaries you set." Elena stared at him, waiting for the punchline. "I'm kidding. Maybe, but no," he was absolutely serious. She glanced at the envelope. With that kind of money, she could cover nearly all her dad's medical bills, buy his meds for the month, and maybe even stop working late-night shifts for a while. She didn't like the way he offered it, but the money was real, and time wasn't on her side. "Fine," she said at last slowly, "but I have conditions." Alexander nodded like he was listening to a contract clause. 1. Don't touch me. Not even by accident. 2. Don't treat me like hired help. I'm living with you, not working for you. 3. I have the right to leave any time if anything feels wrong. Alexander responded immediately. "Agreed. And one more thing." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "I don't dress to please. I don't smile unless I mean it, and I won't hesitate to call a cab and leave if you act like a jerk." Alexander tilted his head slightly. "Direct. I like that." She crossed her arms, half smirking. "I don't care what you like. I'm doing this because I need the money, not to make you look good." Alexander pressed his lips together. "I'll pick you up at 9 a.m. tomorrow." "No need. I'll take the subway. Just give me the address." For the first time he raised an eyebrow and almost surprised reaction. Very few people ever turned down a ride in his private car. Elena clearly wasn't like the others. As Alexander walked out the door, Elena let out a long breath, her hand tightening around the thick envelope. Her heart was racing, not because of him, but because of something else. It felt like she had just signed her name on the first page of a story without knowing how it would end. She returned to the counter and picked up the phone, dialing the clinic where her father was staying. "I'll transfer the payment this week," she said softly, almost in a whisper. "I just got a new job." The iron gates opened silently like a whisper made of steel. Elena stood before a modern mansion tucked behind a line of maple trees and massive reflective glass panels. She frowned, glanced at the address on her phone, then back at the building. This couldn't be a private residence. It looked more like a space control center than a home. A housekeeper in a grey uniform stepped out and opened the main door with a polite bow. "Miss Hart." Elena gave a small nod. "Yes. I'm here by Mr. Vance's invitation. Please, this way." She stepped inside and for a moment words escaped her completely. The ceiling soared nearly 20 feet high, with lights that shifted color based on the daylight outside. Abstract frameless paintings lit from behind by cold LEDs adorned the walls. A tiny robot zoomed across the floor and cheerfully chirped, "Welcome," in a mechanical female voice, then handed her a pair of house slippers. "He has robots handing out slippers," Eleanor whispered, nearly overwhelmed. The living room was as wide as a mini soccer field, furnished with imported Italian leather, hidden speakers, and not a speck of dust in sight. Eleanor turned to the housekeeper. "How many people clean this place every day?" No one. A deep, familiar voice answered from the second floor. Alexander descended the walnut staircase in a fitted grey suit, hands in his pockets. I don't like people disrupting the order. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. And robots don't make mistakes. They're programmed to be emotionless. Works well for me. She smirked. At least you admit that. Alexander gave her a quick once-over thin sweater, dark jeans, an old backpack slung over one shoulder, completely out of sync with the glossy mansion that looked like an art gallery. Your room is on the 3rd floor. Private entrance, private lock. I've instructed no one else to enter, he said. Thanks, but I don't need special treatment. I'm here to do a job well, to accompany you, not to be treated like a princess. Alexander raised an eyebrow briefly. She still wasn't intimidated, unlike most who bowed their heads, treaded carefully, or tried to win favor. Elilana remained unapologetically herself, with blunt words and a mischievous smile. That evening, Alexander sat at the head of a long dining table, facing Elilana. The meal had been prepared by a private chef, French-style roasted beef, asparagus, and butter sauce, and chilled melon soup. Elilana picked up her fork and shook her head. I don't remember signing up to dine at a 5-star restaurant every night. You can request a different dish, he said, voice flat like a computer. It's not that. I just don't know how to eat this without looking like I'm dissecting an organ. Alexander watched her struggle with the meat, then silently reached over and offered her a different knife. Use this one. Elilana looked up, surprised. Wow, you know how to use cutlery? Lawyers aren't cavemen, he replied. But I thought robots didn't eat. He paused. Elilana stared at him. You just wanted to smile, didn't you? No. Yes. I saw the corner of your mouth twitch. She rested her chin in her hand, tilting her head like a cross-examining lawyer. Is this progress? Alexander set down his knife. I don't need to be analyzed. Shame. I actually enjoy doing it. After dinner, Elilana took the initiative to clear the plates. She washed each one carefully, dried them by hand, while a nearby robot blinked and announced, "This system has auto-cleaning capability." She smiled at it. Doing it myself makes me feel human, you know. Alexander appeared in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. You don't have to do that. There's staff for it. Maybe, but I just ate, and I don't like anyone else washing my dishes, unless you'd like to help. He raised a brow. Me? You live here, don't you? She handed him a towel. Dry the plate, Mr. Cold-hearted lawyer. Alexander stood still for 3 seconds. Then he stepped forward. For the first time in his life, Alexander Vance, the man who once argued before the Supreme Court, held a dish towel. Eleanor whistled. If the press saw this, the headline would be, "Billionaire washes dishes for mysterious girl." The press can't get in here, but I got in, which means I'm more special than they are. Right. Alexander opened his mouth to retort, but then a strange sound came out. He laughed. It was just a faint smirk, a flicker of light behind those grey eyes, but enough for the nearby robot to freeze for 2 seconds, as if malfunctioning. Elilana stood frozen too, eyes as wide as the plate she was holding. Dear God, did you just smile? Alexander quickly turned away, wiping the last dish. I inhaled steam. Oh, of course, and I'm Princess Diana reincarnated. She burst out laughing. He didn't respond, but his lips were still curved slightly as he left the kitchen. That night, Eleanor lay in a bed the size of her entire old apartment, staring up through a glass ceiling at the glittering stars above. A strange house, a strange day, and a man, even stranger. But for the first time, she thought, he's not emotionless. He's just forgotten how to show it. And maybe, just maybe, she was the first person to make that ice begin to crack. Have you ever had chicken pho in Little Vietnam? Eleanor asked as they stepped out of the glass tower that Saturday afternoon. Alexander tilted his head toward her. I don't eat street food. It's not sanitary. Pity, Eleanor shrugged. Because the po there is so good, you'll want 3 bowls, and I'm starving. She didn't wait for an answer. She walked briskly to the curb and hailed a cab. Alexander hesitated just a second, then followed. He could have called a private car, even a helicopter if needed, but for some reason he didn't. The rickety old cab rattled as it sped across the Williamsburg Bridge and into a crowded market street where food stalls stood side by side. Neon lights flickered, and the smell of grilled meat and broth filled every corner. Elilana came alive in this place, nodding at the fruit vendor, smiling at the woman selling buns, and stopping in front of a tiny restaurant with a smudge sign, Foga Sao Moi. They sat at a red plastic table under a makeshift awning, a few chairs, a tired-looking Vietnamese man slurping porridge behind the counter. Elilana ordered 2 bowls of pho and extra lime and chili. Alexander sat up straight, scanning the surroundings like he was attending a court hearing. "When do I get hand sanitizer?" he asked dryly. Eleanor laughed. "After you eat and feel happy. That's the rule here." 10 minutes later, Alexander stared down at his empty bowl and looked up. "Not bad." Eleanor leaned her chin on her hand and winked. "You're officially a normal person now. I'm still a lawyer." "Yeah, but now you're a lawyer who eats street-side pho." That evening, instead of heading back to the mansion, Elilana dragged him to an old cinema at the corner of the street, where tickets cost $4, and the foldable seats creaked with every shift. "What movie are we watching?" Alexander asked, eyeing the schedule of old black and white titles. "Casablanca," Eleanor replied. "You ever seen it?" Number. But I know it's an American film icon." "Then you have to watch it." She grinned. "Not for cinema's sake, but to understand why a single line can hurt for a lifetime." Alexander looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the faded neon light on her cheek made her look timeless, like someone from an older world, where emotions lived in quiet simplicity, untouched by hurry or noise. They sat in the theater. Elilana propped her feet on the seat in front, snacking on popcorn gone soft from the humidity. Alexander, as always, sat upright, but his hands weren't clenched anymore. When the final line echoed, "Here's looking at you, kid," he glanced sideways. Elilana said nothing, just smiled softly, sadly, eyes still fixed on the screen. They left the theater at 9 p.m., but Eleanor didn't head home. "There's one more place," she said, tugging his sleeve. They stopped at a small park where the children had already gone home. Only the dim yellow lights remained, casting a nostalgic glow over the old playsets. Elilana ran to a mini merry-go-round and plopped onto one of the squeaky metal seats. "Come on, I won't let you fall." She waved him over. Alexander hesitated, then sat beside her. She gave the ride a push, and the two of them began to spin slowly. Cool night wind rustled the trees. There was no air filter, no surveillance cameras, no assistance in sight. "When's the last time you played anything?" Elilana asked. "I don't remember," he answered truthfully. "What about the last time you laughed at something ridiculous?" Alexander looked at her for a moment, then shook his head. "Maybe never." Elilana fell silent. The merry-go-round kept turning. "Have you ever loved someone?" she asked softly, not looking at him. Alexander tensed. For the first time since meeting her, it took him several seconds to respond. "Yes," he said, eyes staring up at the night sky. "My mother." Elilana turned toward him. Alexander still didn't look at her. His voice was quiet, steady, like reading from a personal record. "She left when I was 8. Left me a letter. No apology. Just wrote, 'I need a different life.'" Eleanor gripped the cold iron bar tighter. He continued, "I learned to believe love was dangerous, that it makes people betray, leave, and justify it with pretty handwritten notes. I chose law because I needed rules to contain the emotions that once tore me apart." The night wind whispered through the trees. Eleanor didn't speak. She simply placed her hand gently on the metal bar between them, not touching him, but close enough that he'd know he wasn't alone. After a long while, she finally said, "I don't think love is dangerous. I think it's the only thing keeping us from completely falling apart." Alexander looked at her. She wasn't preaching, wasn't judging, just there, real, peaceful, and stronger in silence than any courtroom speech. He let out a breath soft, almost invisible, but it was the kind of breath that felt like it had been held in for years. That night in the cab ride home, Alexander didn't check his phone, didn't open his email. He just looked out the window. Elilana's reflection glowed on the glass beside him, her hair resting gently, eyes half closed from fatigue. And for the first time, there was a strange kind of quiet inside him. Not empty, but warm. Still following the story, Wednesday, on the 4th day of the cohabitation contract, Alexander left his office mid-afternoon, wrist still aching from 3 grueling hours of typing and legal paperwork. Today, He declined every meeting, ignored every email, and silenced every message from his assistant. Strangely, he just wanted to take a walk, something he used to consider a waste of time. Faint jazz music drifted in from the backyard, not loud, but enough to make him pause as he passed the glass hallway that led to the garden. He opened the door. The breeze swept through the hem of his dress shirt, and he stopped at the threshold. Eleanor was crouched on the ground, chin in hand, hair loosely tied, playing Owen Quan, a Vietnamese counting game with 3 neighborhood kids. Dry leaves scattered around her, little pebbles between them, and on her lips, a smile so unguarded, so real. 3 pebbles here, 2 over there. No sneaking extras in, she warned a mischievous boy, half scolding, half laughing. One of the children burst into laughter and fell back onto the grass. Elelana leaned instinctively, catching the boy in both arms, holding him close for a few seconds before letting go. Alexander saw that moment, the way her hands wrapped around the boy, how protective she was, the soft, warm look in her eyes. He had never seen that in any woman who had passed through his life. She laughed genuinely. Not the polished kind used to impress, but the kind that was effortless, carefree, unburdened. He stepped closer, but paused when Elelana looked up. Their eyes met in silence stretched between them for a beat too long. "You're out here?" she asked softly, as if unsure whether she was ready to share her little world with him. "Yeah, I heard noise." His voice was low, but his gaze never left her. "The kids came to borrow books. I couldn't say no. The curly-haired one loves Peter Pan, but tried to sneak Sherlock Holmes into his backpack. Should I be mad? Number. But he might qualify as petty theft," he replied, mouth twitching. She laughed. "You really don't know how to diffuse a moment, do you?" "No need. That's your job." The space between them stilled. Without asking, Alexander sat down beside her. The kids went silent for a heartbeat, then continued chirping like sparrows. Elelana raised a skeptical brow. "You're actually going to play Owan? I want to understand it. Seems more exciting than court." She shook her head, smiling, then started explaining. Her finger brushed his as she showed him how to move the pebbles. Alexander's hand stiffened for a fraction of a second, but she didn't pull away. She held it there, a quiet test. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her, and in his eyes, Eleanor saw it. The ice was melting. That evening, rain fell steady and somber like an unnamed song. Alexander sat alone in the living room, his suit replaced by a light sweater. The warm glow of a floor lamp cast shadows across the walls. A copy of Sapiens lay open on the coffee table, untouched. He wasn't reading. He was staring at the raindrops sliding down the glass. A gentle knock on the door. Elelana stepped in, holding a tray of ginger tea and a novel. Her sweater hugged her shoulder softly. Her damp hair clung slightly to her cheeks. And her eyes, they looked like home. "No sugar, no sliced ginger, just your style. I am the law. I have no taste buds," she said teasingly, placing the tray on the table and leaning in a little closer than usual, lips curved in mischief. Alexander looked at her. "You look nice." Eleanor raised a brow. "I'm in pajamas." "Still nice." She sat next to him, not across from him, no polite distance like before. She picked up the book and gently rested her head against his shoulder, flipping open to the first page. Alexander didn't move, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted her to stay there. Her voice began to read low, warm, and smooth like the rain outside. "We don't choose who we love, nor when. Love arrives like rain without needing permission." He looked down at her hair, strands brushed against his sweater. The subtle scent of her skin mingled with the steam from the tea, quietly waking senses he'd long forgotten he had. "I think," she whispered, "sometimes the heart doesn't need to try. It just needs someone who knocks in the right rhythm." Alexander said nothing, but his hand for the first time moved gently, resting over hers as she held the book. Elelana froze, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her head slightly, eyes meeting his, so close that if he leaned in just a bit more, their lips would touch. He didn't, but the way he looked at her, it was a kiss suspended in air. Moments passed. Elelana closed her eyes, leaned fully into him, and fell asleep. Alexander stayed still as if moving would undo the shape of the world. He watched her, the long, soft lashes, the faint curve of her lips, her breathing steady. Her hair spilled across his shoulder like silk, carrying with it the warmth of something real. He raised his other hand, gently brushing a few strands from her cheek. The first time he truly touched her, not by accident, not by chance, but by intention, driven by a heart, finally brave enough to act. She stirred slightly in sleep, her hand sliding to his thigh, fingers hooking into the hem of his sweater. Alexander leaned in, noticing how, even in dreams, she held on to him, and he smiled. A real smile. No smirk, no hesitation, the smile of a man who knew he was alive. Late that night, as the rain softened to a whisper, Alexander gently pulled a blanket over Eleanor, tucking it up to her chin. His fingers brushed her cheek, warm, soft, too real to be part of a dream. He leaned close, placed a feather-like kiss on her forehead, a touch so tender it almost didn't exist. "Good night, Eleanor Hart," he whispered. "You just taught me how to love." And then he stayed beside her. Not to guard, not to shield, but to keep his own heart from drifting away. Sunday morning, day 7, time moved like a cruel joke. The closer it drew to the end, the slower each minute passed, each one heavier than the last, as if the world was conspiring to make Alexander feel the one thing he'd spent his whole life avoiding. The fear of losing something money could never buy back. Elilana sat at the kitchen table, bathed in morning sunlight, hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa. Her gaze drifted out toward the garden, now blanketed in a delicate layer of mist. She wasn't reading, she wasn't listening to music, her usual morning habits. Today, she was just sitting, silent, waiting. Across the mansion behind the office door, Alexander stood frozen. He had been standing there for nearly 20 minutes. He hadn't stepped out because he knew that the moment he opened that door, the illusion of temporary would shatter. He caught his reflection in the mirror on the wall. Grey dress shirt, neatly knotted tie, hair combed into perfect place. He looked every bit the man the world knew. Alexander Vance, lawyer, billionaire, steel-hearted strategist, the familiar armor, the same old mask. But beneath it was a storm. He wanted to keep her. He wanted to say, "Stay, Eleanor. I need you." He wanted to pull her into his arms and tell her everything. That yes, it had started as a bet, but every moment since had been real. Her laugh was real. The way her fingers brushed his had been real. The sound of her breathing as she fell asleep on his shoulder so real it made his chest ache. But he didn't say it. Not because of pride, but because he was afraid. Afraid that if she knew the truth, she'd leave and never look back. Afraid her gaze would change, from soft to disappointed, from warm to distant, from trusting to betrayed. And he wasn't brave enough to risk that, so he stepped out like it was just another morning. By noon, Eleanor stood at the door, backpack slung over one shoulder. She packed lightly, a few changes of clothes, a half-finished novel, and a heart she wasn't sure was still whole. Alexander stood across from her, hands in his pockets, but his fingers were curled into fists so tight, his nails dug into his palms. "I transferred the full 7,000, he said, voice flat, like reading a verdict he didn't want to sign. "I got it." She nodded. No anger, no bitterness, just calmness, so calm it hurt. "Do you need a car? Number?" "I'd like to walk a bit." His lips parted. Something inside him cracked wide open. He nearly said her name, nearly stepped forward and grabbed her hand, but he stayed still, trapped in the prison of his own fear, disguised as self-control. Eleanor looked at him one more time. Maybe. She had waited for him to say something, anything. But nothing came. She smiled. A small, sad thing as fragile as a broken thread. "Thanks for the ginger tea," he said off-topic, reaching for anything. "Thanks for helping me pay for my father's hospital bill," she replied. "Good luck on your next case." The words hit like a knife, skimming the surface just deep enough to bleed. He watched as she stepped through the iron gates. Her brown coat swayed with each step. No glance back, no goodbye, no chance for redemption. The gate closed behind her, and with it, every unsaid thing was sealed shut. He turned back inside, hard hollow, like the mansion itself, spotless, stunning, and soulless. On the living room table, beneath the last cup of ginger tea she had ever made for him, was a small note. Pale yellow paper, purple ink, the handwriting soft, just like her voice. "I don't know what I was to you this past week, but I know this. If any of it was real, then I hope you'll be braver than you pretend to be. Don't let this cold world pull you back, because I've seen who you really are, and that person doesn't deserve to be buried. Eleanor, he read it, then read it again, and a third time his eyes glued to the page, while his heart clenched tighter with every word. That night, Langford Club, 58th floor. Alexander entered the room. Same suit, same presence, but his eyes weren't the same. Marcus was pouring cognac. He spotted Alexander and smirked. Well, she survived. Didn't flee in the middle of the night. Alexander didn't answer right away. Then he looked straight at Marcus, not cold, but empty. She stayed all 7 days, he said, voice low. And you? Marcus raised a brow. Kicked her out like all the others. Alexander didn't respond. It was a simple question, but the answer was too bitter to speak. Finally, he said barely above a whisper, I lost. Marcus burst into laughter. What? Alexander Vance admits defeat? What was she? Some kind of sorceress? Alexander didn't laugh. He pulled the Manhattan West contract from his coat and placed it on the table. Take it. I don't need it anymore. Marcus froze. Damn. If this is what losing looks like, you don't seem too torn up about it. Alexander turned away. His voice was quiet but firm, like a sentencing handed down in court. I lost the moment I let her walk away without the courage to tell her the truth. Late that night, Alexander returned to the mansion. Everything looked the same. Quiet, spotless Italian perfection. But something was missing. Something wood grain and marble couldn't replace. Something no robot could recreate. He walked into the kitchen, opened the cabinet to pull out 2 mugs and Old Habit, then remembered there was only one now. The ginger tea had gone cold in his hands. He looked across the table to the chair she used to sit in, where she once read, once laughed, once leaned on his shoulder, and fell asleep. He reached out, fingers brushing the armrest, as if hoping her warmth still lingered there, and he whispered a confession too late to matter, too soft to undo what had already been done. I should have asked you to stay, but I chose silence. And that silence was the biggest mistake of my life. 2 weeks had passed since Eleanor walked out of the mansion. Alexander's life returned to what it used to be: high-profile lawsuits, tense boardroom negotiations, and legal contracts longer than most novels. But oddly, the things that once felt normal now felt empty. He tried making ginger tea, but it didn't taste right. Tried playing jazz in the living room, but it sounded like meaningless noise. He even ordered chicken pho from Samoy again, only to realize it wasn't the soup that made it special. It was who he'd eaten it with. Alexander still hadn't reached out to Eleanor, not because of pride, but because of cowardice. He convinced himself that if she wanted to come back, she'd find her way. What he didn't expect was that the only thing worse than silence was the truth revealed by someone else. Monday morning, Alexander sat at his office desk when his assistant Nathan entered, a stack of tabloid newspapers in hand, voice cautious. Sir, you might want to see this. Alexander barely glanced until the bold headline struck him like a punch to the chest. Billionaire lawyer's cruel bet exposed. I can last 7 days with a nobody waitress. Beneath it was a blurred but unmistakable photo of him and Eleanor walking together through the food district, both smiling, her eyes still held trust, warmth, and now Alexander saw clearly what he had lost. He grabbed the paper, eyes flying over the lines. The article quoted high society sources, and unsurprisingly, Marcus was named. It didn't just expose the bet, it painted Eleanor as a naive girl, exploited as part of a sick game by the elite. Alexander shot to his feet, knocking over his coffee without noticing. His voice came out raw. Call libretto. Nathan dialed. A minute later, he returned, face pale. The bookstore has been closed since last week, sir. She quit suddenly. The owner said she left town with her father. No forwarding address, no contact. Alexander sank into his chair. His heart felt like it had fallen off a cliff. He had won countless court battles, crushed ruthless opponents with nothing but his mind. But faced with the silence of one woman, he was utterly powerless. No farewell, no accusations, just gone. That night, Alexander didn't return to the mansion. Instead, he wandered the streets of Brooklyn. No driver, no assistant, no agenda. For the first time, he walked alone. He passed the Poe place. It was closed. Turned down the street where the old movie theater once stood, now replaced by a sleek, soulless multiplex. He stopped at the small park, where she once sat on the merry-go-round, only to find the old metal seat replaced by a sterile plastic one. Everything had changed except him standing still, swallowed by the emptiness he had created. He remembered Eleanor's smile when she read, the way she frowned when he didn't know how to wash dishes, the way she looked at him not as a billionaire but as a man who needed healing. And now all of it was gone. That night, back at the mansion, Alexander walked straight to the room that had once been hers. Everything was still there. The neatly folded blanket, the ceramic mug that read, "Books over Billionaires," and a small notebook resting on the pillow. He picked it up. No title, no hardcover, just the kind of cheap notebook she used to jot down inventory for the store. The first page held a single line written in careful script. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here." Alexander swallowed hard. Page 2. "I'm not angry about the bet. I'm angry that you didn't have the courage to tell me after I trusted you." Page 3. "I'm not perfect. I'm broke, messy, and overly emotional. But I was honest, and you were only honest when I was no longer there." The final page. "You made your choice." Alexander closed the notebook. His hands trembled. For the first time in his life, Alexander Vance, the man who never knew what it meant to lose something that truly mattered, realized some things once lost are never coming back. And this time, he didn't blame anyone, because he knew with painful clarity he was the one who destroyed the most precious thing ever to enter his life. The week following the tabloid scandal was a waking nightmare in Alexander Vance's world. A world once ruled by logic, precision, and control. He stopped going to court, stopped signing contracts, stopped meeting clients. He turned off his phone, handed over every case to his assistant, and left his office with only one sentence. "If anyone asks, tell them I'm looking for the only thing that ever mattered." Alexander began his search like a blind man stumbling through a sea of strangers. First stop, Libretto bookstore, the place where it all began. The store was shuttered, a faded for lease sign hanging on the door. He knocked, and the kind-faced elderly shop owner remembered him instantly. "She left right after that article came out," the woman said softly. "Didn't say where she was going, just that her father needed cleaner air somewhere far from the city." "How far is far?" Alexander asked, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. She only shrugged. "She mentioned a small town started with a G, I think. Said it had lots of trees and mountains nearby. Did anyone work with her before?" "She helped out at a little bookstore in Manhattan for a while, a few months before she came here." Alexander thanked her and caught the next train to Manhattan. Manhattan. He arrived at a tiny bookstore tucked into the corner of 5th Street. The Italian owner, a bespecked old man, immediately recognized Eleanor's photo. "Oh yes, the girl who read Janir 10 times. Kind soul, loved books, always ordered ice milk coffee," he said, smiling wistfully. "She once told me if she could, she'd open a free reading class for underprivileged kids." "Did she say where?" Alexander pressed. "She mentioned her mother's hometown, said it had hills, streams, and maples. Glenville, Glenbrook, something like that." Alexander wrote down every G-town he could find, and so began his needle in a haystack search. Over the next week, Alexander traveled to 7 towns across New York and Connecticut, all starting with the letter G. In each one, he asked roadside vendors, knocked on bookstore doors, wandered into dusty libraries. He carried a photo of Eleanor smiling among piles of books and held it out to strangers with a voice no longer belonging to a billionaire, but to a man looking for the woman he loved. "Who is he?" someone asked once. "A movie star." "No," Alexander said, shaking his head. "Just someone who was very, very stupid." Friday afternoon, Glen Haven, a town so small it didn't even have a traffic light. Alexander had spent hours wandering with no luck, and was about to turn back when he saw them, a group of children running through a narrow alley behind the town's library. They laughed loudly, books clutched in their arms, some with torn covers, dog-eared pages. A little girl stopped to catch her breath on the sidewalk. Alexander crouched beside her. "Where did you get those books?" he asked gently. She pointed behind her. "From the reading class. Miss Eleanor is teaching us Harry Potter." Alexander's heart skipped a beat. "Miss who?" "Miss Eleanor? She's really good. She even does the voices." He didn't wait another second. He ran down a trail behind the library, where the woods opened into a clearing with a small wooden house at its edge. The roof was tin, the windows wide open. Laughter spilled out like music. Through the glass, he saw her. Eleanor sat in the middle of a circle of kids, Charlotte's Web in her hands, her voice warm, her eyes glowing, no makeup, hair tied loosely. And yet, in that moment, more beautiful than any woman he had ever known. She belonged to a world he could never buy, never argue his way into, never control, a world he could only ask to be part of. He raised his hand and knocked gently on the door. She looked up, froze. Their eyes met hers, filled with disbelief and something deeper than anger. Alexander stood still. No grand speech, no excuses, no justifications, just one sentence. "I came to finish the chapter I walked out on." Elelana didn't reply. She looked at him for a long time, then turned to the children and smiled softly. "Take a 10-minute break." "Okay." She stood, walked to the door, and closed it behind her. "I found you," Alexander whispered, voice rough. "You didn't have to look far," Eleanor said quietly. "What's hard is knowing why you came. Not to apologize. Then why?" He drew in a breath, deep and unsteady, to say, "I don't need rules anymore. I need you." Elelana stared at him. Her gaze wasn't cold, but it wasn't easy to read either. "It's too late," Alexander nodded. "I know, but if you keep reading to the kids every day, maybe someday I'll be allowed to listen, even if it's just from a distance." She didn't answer. A soft breeze stirred her hair and stirred his heart once more. That evening, Alexander didn't stay. He didn't beg, but before he left, he placed a book by the door, The Little Prince. Inside, he had written, "What is essential is invisible to the eye. I was blind, but now I want to learn again through you." 3 days after Alexander left Glen Haven, Eleanor assumed he had vanished like a strange wind passing through her life, only to disappear again. She tried to focus on her classes. She still told stories, read books, and laughed. But somewhere deep inside, something refused to settle because she had seen the change in him. The way he was quiet, the way he didn't defend himself, didn't plead, just stood there like a man who finally knew he was wrong and wasn't asking for anything but a chance to make it right. Thursday afternoon, Eleanor came home after teaching and found an envelope sitting on her front step. No name, no note, but the firm, familiar handwriting made her heart stutter. She picked it up, sat on the wooden bench under the porch, and opened it. Inside was a simple leather-bound notebook and a folded piece of paper that read, "If you're reading this, maybe I did at least one thing right. A V." She opened the notebook. On the first page, written in clean, precise handwriting, "Journal. 7 days with Ellen Herart. Day 1. She's nothing like any woman I've ever met. No makeup, no flattery, no hesitation to call me robot. And strangest of all, she didn't know or didn't care who I was. Day 2. She makes ginger tea better than my assistant. She washes dishes by hand, refuses to use the machine. She said, 'You have to feel water to remember you're alive.' I didn't understand until I felt my hands tremble from the warmth. Day 3. She dragged me to eat street-side pho. I almost refused, but sitting beside her, watching her laugh at me, fumbling with chopsticks, I finished every bite, not because the food was good, but because she made it unforgettable. Day 4. She laughed with kids like she'd known them forever. She read books with eyes that spoke. And I, who once believed emotion was weakness, stood still watching her for 10 straight minutes. Day 5. She didn't ask about my past, didn't push, but somehow she made me talk about my mother, her leaving, and my fear of love. I didn't cry, but I opened up. Day 6. It rained. She made tea, right beside me, didn't hug me, didn't comfort me, just sat there, and that was the gentlest embrace I've ever known. Day 7. I let her go. I thought silence would hurt less, but now I know my silence hurt her the most. Elelana closed the notebook. Tears fell quietly like misting rain. Small software, but deeply soaked. She didn't know how long she sat there. When she looked up, Alexander was standing just a few steps away. No luxury car, no suit, just a light grey sweater, jeans, and eyes that looked like someone who had finally unraveled something inside himself. He approached slowly, cautiously, as if afraid she might vanish again. And then he dropped to his knees, in the golden afternoon light, on the grass, still damp with morning dew. Alexander Vance, who had once stood before hundreds of judges, spoke only 3 sentences. "I'm sorry. There's no more bet. There's only me and you." Elelana's voice trembled. Her eyes shimmered with pain. "Do you know the thing that hurt me most wasn't the bet?" she said. "It was that I trusted you. I thought even if you didn't know how to love, you at least knew how to be honest." Alexander didn't answer. He didn't try to explain because she deserved silence, the kind that listens, not defends. Elelana stepped closer. She reached out, touching his cheek, not to comfort, but as if testing something fragile. Was he still real? "You could give me everything," she whispered, "but I don't want your money. Not your mansion, not your robots. The only thing I ever wanted was to trust you." Alexander closed his eyes, and from the corner of one eye, a single tear fell, landing on the back of her hand. He had always believed tears were weakness, but now he understood they were courage, the bravery to let someone see your pain. Elelana said nothing more. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. But she didn't leave either. She sat beside him on that small step where the earth was still soft with morning fog, and for the first time after everything, they were no longer broken people. They were simply two humans choosing to stay, even with their scars. But this time they would heal together. 1 month later, across the financial headlines, a familiar name made an unexpected return: Alexander Vance. But this time, it wasn't because of billion-dollar mergers, nor for winning a sensational court case. It was for something that to Wall Street seemed downright absurd. Billionaire lawyer walks away from investments to open free community library. The headlines sent shockwaves through the financial world. Shareholders panicked. The media buzzed. Some speculated he was spiraling into depression. Others confidently declared, "There's definitely a woman behind this." And they were right. The Elelana Hart Community Library opened in the small, sleepy town of Glen Haven, a place with no supermarket, no cinema, and barely any cell service. But now, it had a warm 3-story wooden building housing over 15,000 books, all carefully selected and donated. Right at the entrance stood a plaque dedicated to the one who taught me how to read, not just words, but the things in life that matter most: Alexander Vance. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, Glen Haven witnessed a sight no one would have believed a year ago. The coldest billionaire in the country, dressed in simple shirt sleeves, holding a book, sitting among laughing children reading Charlotte's Web or Harry Potter in a voice that once commanded silence in courtrooms. But Alexander wasn't reading to impress. He was reading because he wanted to stay. Elelana often sat nearby, eyes shining, still not quite believing what she was seeing. He wasn't trying to prove anything. No speeches, no PR stunts, no headlines, just quiet, consistent, steadfast effort, day by day, word by word. Meanwhile, back in New York, the prestigious law firm Vance & Cross was undergoing a quiet revolution. Alexander still handled corporate litigation, but for the first time in his career, he began accepting pro bono defense cases for innocent people who couldn't afford lawyers. The legal community called it financial suicide. The media suspected it was a rebranding strategy. Only Eleanor knew the truth. It wasn't an image. It was a man learning to become the best version of himself. One day during story time, a shy boy raised his hand. "Mister, Alex, did you used to hate books?" Alexander paused, then smiled. "Number, I just had never met anyone who made me love them." "Like Miss Eleanor?" The class giggled. Alexander glanced at Eleanor. She was laughing too, eyes glistening. In that moment, he knew everything he gave up was worth it. The following week, a young reporter from a major news outlet visited Glen Haven. She had once covered Alexander's courtroom victories. When she walked into the library and found him labeling children's books, she blinked in disbelief. "Mr. Vance?" she asked. He looked up mildly surprised. "I remember you. You once called me a cold, calculating algorithm in a suit." She laughed awkwardly. "I'd never imagined seeing you in a place like this. We all end up where we're meant to be," he said quietly, "even if it was never on the original itinerary." "What made you change?" she asked. "The press is calling you the backward billionaire." Alexander was silent for a moment. Then he pointed toward Elelana, who was across the room, reading to 2 hearing-impaired children, using gentle gestures and expressions. "She didn't just help me change," he said. "She gave me a reason, too." The reporter jotted it down, but she knew this wasn't a soundbite. It was the truth. That night, Eleanor and Alexander sat on the porch, sipping their usual ginger tea. "You gave up your entire empire just to open a library in a tiny town," Eleanor said, half teasing. "No," Alexander replied. "I didn't give anything up. I just found what I didn't know I was missing." "What's that?" He turned, looking into her eyes. "You," she blushed, nudging his shoulder. "You're getting cheesy, counselor. You didn't talk like this before. I also didn't know how to wash dishes back then." He winked. "Now? I'm excellent at it," she laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. The night breeze was cool. There was no noise, no pressure, no calculations. Just two people once broken, once lost, now writing a new chapter together. No more coldness, no more loneliness. Just love proven not by words, but by action. 1 year later, Liberto Bookstore reopened. Gone was the four-leaf sign swaying under the Sunday. Gone were the layers of dust covering the faded wooden shelves. Everything had been restored with care. From the cheerful doorbell chime to the hand-labeled genre signs Elilana had once taped up as a part-time worker. But one thing had changed beyond recognition. The bookstore now belonged to two people. Elilana stepped out from the back storage room, holding a steaming cup of coffee and a freshly wrapped novel. She wore an ivory linen dress, her hair tied up with a pale blue ribbon. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a soft golden halo across her shoulder. At the front counter, where there used to be only a clunky register and a few bargain books, now sat something unfamiliar, a small black wooden box, no larger than her palm. She frowned. On top of it lay a neatly folded note. "Read page 243 before opening." Her heartbeat faltered for just a moment, hands trembling slightly. She set the coffee down and reached beneath the counter for The Little Prince, the very book Alexander had once given her when he first walked into the store. She flipped to page 243. A different page had been glued in. The handwriting was unmistakable, precise, deliberate, heartbreakingly careful. "You once told me I didn't know how to love. I didn't argue because back then I truly didn't. But if love means your heart can no longer stay silent, then you were the first voice that ever spoke inside mine." Elilana bit her lip, but the corners of her mouth curved upwards without her knowing. Her heart fluttered like a flower, slowly blooming after the longest winter. She opened the wooden box. Inside was a delicate silver ring, so simple it seemed ordinary, but etched inside the band, in such fine script that she had to tilt it to catch the light, were the words, "No contracts, just love." Just then, the soft chime of the door rang. Elilana looked up. Alexander walked in. No suit, no tie, just a white rolled-up shirt, ash-grey jeans, and a smile so tender it made her breath hitch. He stood between the two bookshelves, right where they used to argue about whether to organize books by genre or by alphabetical order. But now there was no more debate, only hearts waiting to be heard. He stepped slowly toward the center of the store, stopping in front of her. No preamble, no build-up. He dropped to one knee. No hesitation, no trembling, just a gaze so full of light it could have lit up the whole store. This time no bets, no contracts, no clauses, no conditions. Just one question: will you marry me? Elilana froze. She looked at Alexander, then at the ring still nestled in her hand. Then suddenly, she let out a giggle. That same signature laugh that once drove Alexander more insane than any courtroom ever could. "Did you really not get the ring size right?" Alexander winced, clearly flustered. "I measured it using that ring you always wore. But I guess your left and right hands aren't the same." "They're not." She nodded. But she held out her left hand, palm up. "This hand is still ready to wear the ring." Alexander let out a soft breath, not anxious, but relieved. He gently slipped the silver ring onto her finger, and like magic, it fit perfectly. "So, you've forgiven me?" he asked, his eyes never leaving her hand. Eleanor looked down at the ring, then up at him with a teasing squint. Not entirely, but she stood on tiptoe and whispered, "I love you." Alexander didn't wait another second. He pulled her into his arms. No awkwardness, no fear, just the raw, instinctive embrace of a man who had finally reclaimed the missing piece of his soul. And there, in the tiny bookshop, surrounded by the scent of old paper, sunlight, and the sound of a door chime still echoing, they shared their kiss. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't cinematic. It was real, gentle, warm, complete, just like the love that had finally ripened after every storm they'd weathered. News of a small wedding in Glen Haven spread like wildfire across social media. Not because of wealth, not because of glamour, but because it felt genuine. One photo was shared thousands of times. Eleanor in a simple white dress, barefoot in the grass, Alexander in a rolled-up shirt, no tie, holding her hand, looking at her as if she was the only home he had ever known. No one could believe that New York's coldest billionaire, the steel-hearted lawyer who once made love a wager, had ended up proposing in a little bookshop with a silver ring that carried no legal weight, only love. But it happened, and the world finally understood. No one believed it was possible until she melted the heart of a billionaire.